something else I'd be interested in maybe touching on is getting everybody's opinion on quality of instruments all the time. Because it seems like we all want the Stradivarius of timpani. We all want, the Stradivarius of a 5-octave and that kind of thing. And it's like, do you really need a Yamaha 5100? Or can you do it with a practice keyboard or a practice set of fiberglass, Yamaha, whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have, like right now I have these quite nice timpani over here, and I actually still prefer just the Yamaha like standards that I played on all of drum corps. And I think that's just because I'm so used to them. But I know for a high school, I always recommend getting like you don't really need the expensive stuff. It's kind of like, I don't know if you guys have heard of Mode Marimba. It's synthetic 5-octave. And honestly, it sounds great for a high school or, a local college that's just looking to get an extra 5-octave. And, I recommend that lower end to a lot of people.
Well, when I was playing timpani in high school, I went to Ronald Reagan High School. And when I was playing there, I played with Ludwig timpani. And at first, I was like, oh, well, they're not Yamaha. And I saw like other high schools that had Yamaha, and I was like, oh man, that'd be cool. But honestly, kind of growing up sort of like on those drums, it really taught me a lot about how like the intervals have to be very delicate and have to be very precise. And when I switched over to Yamaha, when I went to drum corps, it was like, whoa, this is so much easier. This is so cool. and like playing timpani in drum corps was more of a breeze than anything else, just because I kind of taught myself the hard way. I'm not bashing on Ludwig or anything like that, but it's a little bit more difficult to get those big intervals, especially with like the 23. It's like you have to really hammer the pedal. So I mean, anything that you kind of learn to play in high school or middle school, like it's just going to be easier once you transition to a drum corps, if that's what you want to do. That probably does have Yamaha, and it makes it so much easier.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say in middle school, our band only had 3 timpani. It was a totally mixed match kind of deal. It was like one Yamaha was a 26. There's like a 28-inch Ludwig and a 29-inch. And the 28-inch was a European style, that rides up and down the rod. So like I was in middle school, I didn't know any different. So it's like that's what timpani were to me, So yeah, going to high school was nice. It's like, oh, everything actually looks the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, when in spring training last year with Crown, we were filming the Vic Firth shoot, and it was raining outside, so we had to do it in their music building. And while the battery was recording upstairs, the pit went downstairs into like their band room, and they had this old Rogers fiberglass balance action, and of course, like no head,
hemisphere bowls. Yeah.
They're
like this,
and
this deep.
I've never seen that.
Yeah.
And like the pedal was wood because at some point it broke off, and they just put a 2x4 on it. It's definitely been interesting with the variations I've seen.
We probably won't talk about how to do that tonight, though. I did in grad school. I was at Indiana, and again, that's like one of the luckiest places to go study timpani. I forget how many sets of drums they have there, but it's ridiculous, like probably close to 20 sets of drums that they have there. But they have some old Ludwigs, the balanced action pedals that didn't have tuning gauges. So they made tuning gauges with string and counterweights. Have you guys ever seen that? We just run a string around the drum across the hoop, counterweights with just like washers, and drill a hole in the pedal, top of the pedal, and tie it on. And then you just put a piece of masking tape on the rim where the string goes across, and put a little marker on the string, and they're really accurate for like 75 cents.
I was gonna say, I've got that actually in my bag.
Yeah.
You show up to a gig, you show up to a church, or you show up somewhere that doesn't have gauges. It's like, why not pop them on in 2 seconds?
Exactly. And they'll do the trick.
It's useful, yeah.
For us
Nice.
mortals,
Well,
us mortals who don't have perfect pitch. Yeah, we need this.
I'm sorry.
yeah, right. Whenever I was tuning last summer, Juan would come up and be like, "Bro, why you tune so much?" And it was because I just don't have perfect pitch. I'm sorry. All right.
You guys-
so
Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Brandon.
I was going to say, do you know Matt Nadolny? Played timpani at Crown in 05, 04, 05, and then he was over at Cadets. Matt and I went to USC together, and he's got perfect pitch. And I remember seeing Cadets on tour one time, and he was just sitting, like, he was just beating himself up. I was like, dude, what's the matter? He's like, man, I'm hearing everything a minor third off today. Like, so I don't know. I don't have perfect pitch, so I don't know. But, like, is that a real thing? Like, you can hear perfect intervals off?
I've never experienced that, but I've had not anything drastic like a minor third, but one time, because of drum corps and how it gets hot or cold, even when it rains,
Sure.
The temperature always changes. And so sometimes a C will be a C, but then sometimes a C will be a C sharp if it gets really hot. And it starts kind of messing with your brain because you travel all over. It's different in some places. So I'll sometimes hear stuff like a half step off, and it'll drive me nuts. Like, I'll be like, man, and sometimes the front ensemble is going to be completely in tune, but the brass is going to go super sharp. And sometimes the vibraphones do weird things. So, I mean, that's a whole topic of like who to tune to, either the tubas or the front ensemble as well. But nothing as drastic as a minor third, though. Yeah.
That's why I'm glad I don't have perfect pitch. I really didn't have to deal with that. I'd tune to whoever I could hear. All right. I think we'll get started. I know a lot of people are missing, but we don't want this to run too long. So I'd like to first thank you all for coming. The panelists and I are really excited to have you with us tonight. I know many of you may not know myself or all of us that are on the panel, so we'll start with some introductions. I am currently in my final year as a music ed major at the Frost School of Music. And as part of the Frost Percussion Studio, where I am now, I have had the pleasure of studying under Svet Stoyanov and Matthew Strauss. While completing my degree, I have also had the privilege of serving as a percussionist and timpanist for STRYKE Percussion and as the timpanist for Carolina Crown. I've also worked with several high schools in the South Florida area and hope to begin teaching instrumental or choral music at the secondary level as soon as I graduate. I would like to now introduce our big arranger for the night. James Ancona is the Assistant Director of Athletic Bands at the University of Delaware. In May 2020, he completed his 25th year at this position. James has more than 30 years of experience teaching and arranging for world-class DCI groups, including the Cavaliers, Santa Clara Vanguard, Star of Indiana, and the Cadets. He is currently the front ensemble arranger for Carolina Crown, and as a personal note, Mr. Ancona is the only person that has ever written me a challenging timpani part. Jim, you want to say hi to everyone?
Hey, great to be here. Glad I could challenge you, Stephen.
Yeah. When I first met you, I shook your hand and said, you write some really hard music.
Yeah.
Next up is Anthony Gilleland. Anthony is an instructor and front ensemble arranger based out of Southern California. He is the front ensemble caption head at Woodbridge High School and La Quinta High School. He is also a front ensemble tech with Pulse Percussion, Carolina Crown, and Chino Hills High School. Anthony recently graduated from Cal State Fullerton, where he received his bachelor's degree in percussion performance. He plans to return to pursue a master's degree in percussion performance as well. And Anthony is part of the Vic Firth Zildjian educational team. Anthony, want to say hi?
What's up, guys?
Next up, we have Dr. Brandon Arvay, currently a substitute percussionist and timpanist with the Lexington Philharmonic. He also serves as a PR manager for Global Premiere, marketing and branding director for Marching Health, social media manager for Marimba One, and is VP of Branded 78. Brandon played timpani at Carolina Crown in 2006 and 2008, taught the Battalion Drum and Bugle Corps in 2016 and 17, and published his dissertation entitled a comprehensive method for tuning and pedaling timpani. He holds degrees from the University of South Carolina, Colorado State University, and the University of Kentucky. Say hi, Brandon.
Hey, everybody.
Nice. Finally, we have Juan Arreguin, who is a teacher and composer residing in San Antonio, Texas. He has been teaching the front ensemble at his alma mater, Ronald Reagan High School, since he graduated in 2017, and is majoring in music marketing at UTSA in San Antonio. Juan was the timpanist of the Boston Crusaders from 2017 to 2019 and is now in the Bluecoats front ensemble. As a personal addition, not only does Juan have like 100 years of experience playing timpani between high school and drum corps, he's also one of the most genuine people I've ever had the pleasure of working alongside. He literally once jumped on my trailer and helped me tune timpani because he wanted me to be as relaxed as possible for my show. So just a great guy.
I remember that show.
We have a great, yeah, that was Wake Forest. That was Crown Beat.
Yeah.
I did have a relaxed show, so thank you. We have a great panel here tonight, and we have a lot to talk about. I do want to point out that this is a huge topic. So we are going to focus tonight more on the teaching and arranging side of things, while we have these great panelists here. We're going to do that rather than the day-to-day maintenance and preferences. We'll touch on it a little bit, but I will be having another Zoom clinic just like this with a few younger and more timpanists from more diverse groups. And we'll really go over the day-to-day and maintenance and mallet choice and exercise and all of that. I'm sure you've all been to a Zoom clinic by now, so you know how it works. We're going to do some presentations and some discussion, roundtable discussion for the panelists. And at the end, we'll do a Q&A. So if you have any questions, pop them in the chat and I'll try and monitor it. But if they don't get answered, just pop them up later at the Q&A and try and keep your mic muted at all times so that we don't hear like a dog barking, as much as I love dogs. All right. You guys want to get started?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Let's have Jim. Jim's going to take us a little bit through some arranging side of things and what you may want to give your younger timpanists and your advanced timpanists on with the music side of things.
Yeah, thanks. I want to talk about, we'll talk about and kind of invite the rest of the panelists in. We'll talk a little bit about the musical role in the orchestration for the timpanist, a few things that I think about or what I think they provide that's really special. And then some considerations for me when I write. So if there's any writers out there, what am I thinking about when I write? And I want to show a few musical examples. And rather than showing the parts like, Stephen played and talking about, this is the hardest thing I can write, and this meter is this, and this is the hardest thing about it. Like parts that are actually going to develop your players, from a part that's real basic, minimal tuning changes where they can just work on stroke development and articulation, to parts that have recovery time built in for tuning, and then to getting to tuning while you're playing and more advanced skill sets. So we'll look at 3 parts, actually marching band parts that I wrote for the University of Delaware, rather than doing, again, the high level advanced stuff. Because the one thing we can talk, hopefully we'll get to this tonight, that I don't want to write parts that are going to scare my beginning players away. I don't want them to look at it and go, I can't do that. I identify myself as, I'm a keyboard player. I'm totally afraid of these giant drums that make a lot of noise that goes straight up into your face. I don't want to do this. I want parts where they're going to feel comfortable and just be able to focus on a few things. So we'll start with the musical role. I mean, what can the timpanist provide, and what do I think of that's kind of special to that instrument? And, first of all, it's our only true bass instrument that's acoustic in the front ensemble that has a dynamic range. So even if you have your low C 5-octave marimbas, you're not going to get a true fortissimo out of that low C bar, or you will only one time, and then you're not going to get that anymore. It's an instrument that has a huge dynamic range and has a true bass range. And it's our only true acoustic instrument. And what's important about that is the natural resonance and sustain of that instrument. The player is going to manage that sustain and resonance manually, reacting to the situation, rather than a sample that's going to be kind of a fire and forget timpani note that, again, as Juan was talking about, it's not going to adjust, the intonation on a bad night. It's not going to do all those things that a human will be able to do. So, but as far as its role in the orchestration, obviously, yes, it can fulfill that role of playing that bass line, whether it's doubling a tuba part, or actually playing that part, or playing an outline of that part. Yes, it can serve that function. For me, it is a really amazing, another thing is it's amazing solo voice. And I include that not just as a solo voice, but as a solo front ensemble voice that can balance with powerful battery moments, okay? Not just a concert bass drum with its one pitch, or your concert toms that are tonal but not pitched, but actually pitches that are going to support the musical role and compete with the battery volume-wise. Timpani can play melodies. Okay, there's some, even outside of my writing, there are some arrangers that I've worked with. Eric Johnson, for example, when I was at Cavaliers, who would write amazing melodic timpani moments and sometimes double it like with vibraphone, and he'd write in the upper register and just make the drums sing. So we have that in the bag. I also like to think of timpani from that as somebody who was trained as an orchestral timpanist, the drama that like Beethoven-esque parts can provide, of that tonic dominant, when you think of also Sprach Zarathustra, the Space Odyssey, that would not exist without, the tonic dominant sound. The Beethoven symphonies and bringing in that, Beethoven on the other hand, of just bringing that drama that the drums can bring like nothing else. There's effect sounds that the drums can provide, whether it's as simple as glisses to having other instruments on top of the heads that can create sounds, to different implements that can create sounds. And I always kind of think of all those things combined, that we can go from the end of a spectrum where it's almost an instrument that can function like an upright bass, where it could be lyrical or supportive accompanimental instrument, to a bombastic, soloistic kind of primal drum with pitches, and I can't really think off the top of my head of another instrument that does that quite in that way, that can cover all of those bases so well. So, panelists, I don't know if there's any other roles that you think of, or if you want to comment on any of that stuff, but that's definitely stuff I think of when I'm about to write, as far as things that timpani can do or are special to the drums.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway there, I'll make this quick. The biggest takeaway there is that it is so versatile. I mean, you can be just an impact moment, or you can be doubling the tubas, or you can be doing something beautiful with the metals, the vibraphones and glocks, or a very just the tonic dominant thing. I think at any point, Jim is always, at least from the music I've had from him, he's always considering where I'm, or the timpanist is fitting within the ensemble, and I always feel important. And I'm sure even with the simpler parts, he's doing the same thing. Juan, you were about to say something.
Yeah, for me primarily, it's about, especially just in the marching arts, in an orchestra setting that's completely different, but in the marching arts specifically, for me, it's that kind of that front end attack that tubas really need to really enunciate their parts. Oftentimes, you know, especially when you're bombarded by so many trumpets, mellophones, and baritones on top of a kind of a small tuba ensemble, the timpani is required for their low end to speak. And, you know, especially kind of when, you know, now that they're mic'd, it really helps support their sound just in the front end of things, because, you know, they can sustain a sound for sure, but they can't really attack the sound like a percussion instrument can. So, you know, the cliche of the timpani being the fine line between the percussion section and the wind section, or in orchestra, the double bass and the percussion section. You know, it really is that still in the marching arts world. And that's what's pretty cool about timpani kind of emerging from orchestra into marching ensembles.
Yeah, and to that end, Juan, that's a great point. Because, and the other thing to think of with particularly the high-end band directors, the high-end DCI horn instructors and arrangers, believe me, they want that natural sound that timpani will provide on the front edge rather than a synthetic attack to that. Because I know, and I know Stephen knows this, and I'm sure Brandon and Anthony, like Michael Klesch could hear a fly land about 1,000 yards away, and he's the brass arranger. And if I write a synth sound that has the wrong kind of oscillation in it, he's like, no, that's affecting the trumpet sound. Or that just is adding a synthetic element to the tuba sound. Like, he's very sensitive to that. But anytime I have a tuba part that's going with the timpani, that's a natural blend, I think, that we're used to hearing. So that's a great point. I get in far less trouble with timpani playing with tubas than with electronics playing with tubas. So cool. I want to talk a little bit about when I'm writing, some considerations about you know, when I'm writing for an actual player, what am I thinking about, player or players? And the first thing that I'll think about when I'm writing, obviously, is if it's a solo player, or like in my band situation at the University of Delaware, I rotate players through. It's college band. I want to get as many people in there playing it, even if they're completely uncomfortable. I want to get 4 or 5 people playing timpani and different tunes, different shows. So the first thing I think is their skill set as a player, which would include, or how good is their ear training in matching pitches. I want to know about, and again, if you don't have to have perfect pitch to play timpani. Okay, my ears actually developed a lot through playing timpani, matching pitches, really having to listen down through the band, pick out different timbres to blend and balance with. So it's rather than thinking your ears have to develop to play that instrument, think, let's get you to play this instrument so we can start to develop your ears. I think about stroke technique and how we can develop that. Along with that, their dynamic range. And, you know, we'll get back to that in a minute, but, you know, the dynamic range, now that we're mic'd, it's not really different from like how you would play in an orchestra or a brass choir. I still think the loudest I've ever played was with a symphony, playing Mahler, or in a brass choir in grad school. That's still much louder than I played in drum corps. So thinking about dynamic range, I want to know how good that player's rhythm and pulse control is, how good their pedaling technique is, how much I can challenge that, and different ways of challenging that, and as well as their skill set as far as dampening and kind of articulation detail. So, you know, all that's in the skill set: the ears, hand technique, foot technique, dampening technique. Then obviously I need to know the number and sizes of their drums and the quality of the drums. If they have, you know, a 28 and a 29-inch drum that are, you know, from 2 different decades, with one's a chain pedal, or one's a chain drum and one's a balanced action, you know, then all right, I'll write parts for that. I also want to know in the front ensemble what other bass voices we have. Is there going to be a bass guitar? Is there going to be a synthesizer? So that I can balance all those things without creating too much thickness in that sonic area. And then obviously if it's indoor writing versus outdoor writing, if I'm writing for an indoor drum line, you're in a confined space, and those large membranes are going to take up a lot of sonic area. So you have to be very careful of that, and we have a little bit more freedom with that outdoors, and even in the larger indoor football stadiums, we still have more leeway than you do in a gymnasium. So yeah, those are the things I'm considering when I'm starting to write for them. And then I wanted to show you guys some three basic levels of parts, from this is step one to something that's slightly more advanced, realizing there's probably a few more levels above that to get to the drum corps level, but still this will give you a little bit of a guide. So let me start with something. This is, again, University of Delaware stuff. This was an encore piece by The Who. Can you guys all see this? We good? Yeah. So this is real basic, 3-chord rock stuff. So the timpanist is tuning to, there are 4 pitches. We have 4 drums. We use innovative mallets, the GTX series. So they're numbered 1 through 5. So I tell them what mallet. And guess what? They're not changing pitches through this whole piece. Okay, and it's a medley of Baba O'Reilly and Who Are You, but throughout it's just the same 4 pitches. So guess what we can develop here? We can develop their stroke styles, we can develop some rolls, we can play some basic sound effects here in the center of the drum and different articulations. And again, working on some dynamic range, a true fortissimo, a Mahler-esque fortissimo to a balance and blend, play with the bass guitar, mezzo forte. And again, just basic length of sound, some basic rolls, and that's about it. But again, there's no pitch changes. Tune them, adjust as needed for intonation, but you're pretty much set. Now let's focus on this. Let's focus on getting good rebounded strokes. A lot of the dampening can be like an opposite hand dampening, so you don't have to do a lot of multitasking. Real basic, real straight ahead, simple part. And the player who played this was a good player, but again, it was somebody who kind of identified, I'm a keyboard player, I don't know if I can do this, kind of hedging a little bit. And by the end, she was, full out fortissimos, nice big rebounded strokes. So mission accomplished. There's step one. We're behind the instrument, we're playing with the band, we're confident, and we're not letting certain technical things weigh on your mind too much. Okay, so that's really step one. Not too difficult. Okay, so step two. This is in fact a crown piece that Michael Klesch rewrote for us, Interstellar Suite. And so now we're getting a little bit more advanced. Okay, so we tune our 4 pitches, and the 4 pitches here are, right in the sweet spots of the drums. So it's going to sound really good for you. Nothing's thumpy or thuddy. Everything's going to speak and articulate really well. But you see here, you have, basic tonic dominant idea going on. And, we put in dampening in that as well. Nothing too challenging. Here's recovery time, 2 bars to tune and adjust. And then that soloistic moment on these triads, bum, bum, beam, bum, bum. And again, time to adjust and tune to the next idea. And again, recovery time here as we retune drums. And I always kind of give the tuning so that I can think about that for the players, so that I know they're getting the right pitches on the drums that I want them to be on. And again, soloistic moment here. Again, here's balance and blend. Soloistic moment here, big soloistic moment with the battery here. And again, recovery time for tuning, mallet changes, and so on. So again, in that they're playing a lot of musical roles in accompaniment to soloistic moments, and there's recovery time built in. Okay, so in that recovery time, the bass line could be taken over either by a synth or by bass guitar or whoever, but that timpanist now has time to actually get the ear down, to tune, to check the gauges, get the mallets, get set, and then get in. So a little less continuous. That certainly takes us to the next level of playing. And then one more I'll show you, and then we can talk about it. Again, this was a encore piece that we did, that Michael Klesch did for us, Bohemian Rhapsody. And this is a big orchestral introduction that is not from the original tune, but here the timpanist, I didn't want to have bass guitar in here because it would sound too synthetic. The timpanist is serving almost like a upright bass role here. So there's a lot of continuous playing. There's a lot of tuning, as you can see here, tuning while you're playing. There are more notes down on that low end of the 32 where things can get a little bit murkier. Your ears have to be good to hear those low E's, or as we get down to low D's. And they're tuning on all of the drums. They're moving around quite a bit. And again, we have that supportive bass line throughout this to soloistic interjections throughout, and so on. Again, less recovery time, more continuous playing, rather than focusing on tuning on just maybe the 26 and 29, the inside drums. They're tuning and moving around to all the drums, a little bit more advanced. And again, they're doing more tuning via the gauges while they're playing. So again, kind of the next level of advanced playing. But in my band, if you kind of go through that system as a timpanist and play 2 or 3 charts at different levels, you're going to start moving up that ladder and gaining confidence on the instrument without feeling you're, behind the 8 ball, so to speak, right off the bat. I can't tune this, I can't pedal this, I don't have the technique to do this. Well, we'll develop that. So that's kind of it for me. So I'd love to hear any commentary from the panel and questions. It would be great.
One thing I haven't really seen anybody talk about before, and is sort of the development of where the pitch comes from for the timpanist. Like if you're in a practice room setting, you can have a pitch pipe, you can have a marimba or something next to you. But if you're in an ensemble setting, sometimes that's actually the pitch that was on that drum that you're about to change before. So you reference the previous pitch. Sometimes it's a pitch on another drum, and sometimes it's a pitch from the ensemble, So hopefully I'm making some sense. Jim, do you ever work that kind of thing into this progression that you're talking about?
Yeah, it's interesting. Usually that, so it kind of does develop from that. So at the beginning, you're probably tuning off of one drum to get those 4 pitches that will stay. Mm-hmm. Then a lot of the times I think we're handling that in the rehearsal where when there is that recovery time and the timpanist is tuning, for example, the F has to come down to an E, I may say, hey, you're going to hear that E in the tuba, or you're going to hear that E in the bass guitar, or you're just going to need to use the pedal because you're not going to hear that E until you play it, or, you'll have to tune it off of another drum. So a lot of the times we at least define that in rehearsals to let the student know where the pitches will come from. So yeah, I've never thought of kind of developing in that way, but maybe I think at times that could be something that I put into the part where I could say, hey, tune this to this, listen to the tuba, or listen to the baritone, or listen to whatever to get that pitch. So,
got it.
That's exactly how I learned in choir, which is actually the thing that developed my ears first. I started in choir as a bass, so I now had that lower range to listen to, and you all the time in choir, it's like, where are we going to get this note? Oh, the altos sing it earlier. And I think the progression definitely for timpani is, you start with that, like either your phone or, you bring the bell set over and you play on the bell set and you listen to it. But I think what Jim said about showing them where to find those pitches is definitely really important. Cause in the middle of a show, you're not going you're not gonna have another instrument there to tap. So we do have one question, comes from Lucas Sanchez. He said, "Hi James, I like your recommendation to write in with which pitches on which drums you prefer. Would you also recommend that tradition with non-percussionist composers who don't know timpani that well? Is there ever a situation where you don't write pitch changes and let the player figure it out?"
I don't like to do that because years ago when I used to do that, you'd get, because it's like, that pitch could be on multiple drums, and there's a certain drum, like if we take our, like a C, you could put the C on a 29-inch drum, and it's going to be higher in the register of the drum. It's going to be real articulate and sing really well, and just like that's a great drum to have that note on. You could put the C on a 26-inch drum, which is going to be much lower in the range of the drum. It's going to be a little bit tubbier and kind of have that drummier sound to it. It's not going to sing quite the same way. I find that you kind of, if there's any kind of wobbling in your tuning, fine tuning of your head, it sometimes showcases it a little bit more when it's in that low register. Maybe that's just to my ears, but I would recommend for non-timpanists or non-percussionist composers and arrangers to at least sit with a set of drums long enough to kind of hear those differences, to see like, yeah, the F on this drum has that kind of magic sound, and I put it on this drum and now it has this kind of darker, thuddier sound. Well, sometimes maybe I want that. Sometimes maybe I don't. So just having that awareness, or just pick a timpanist brain of like, where do you like this drum? Where do you like this pitch to sit on the drum to accomplish this? And then there's some times where we don't have a choice, where it's just like, we got to get 12 pitches out here on 5 drums, 12 pitches and 2 bars on 5 drums. So just make it work, kind of thing. But I think in those beginning stages, I really want the timpanist to hear and learn what those prime pitches are on each drum. So.
I have this question now for the timpanists in the room. Juan, Brandon, Anthony, feel free to chime in since you've been a little quiet. So Jim actually, like, none of my Crown music had pitches at all, and
because I couldn't figure it out.
Who don't know, yeah. For those of you who don't know, Lucas, who just asked that question, was my TA at the time, and we would sit in a practice room, and like I would tell him what my tuning scheme was, and then he would be like, "Oh, actually, I'd put that on here because this sounds better." By the time I actually played my first show, I had gone through like 6 versions of tuning schemes. So I know a lot of composers don't write the tuning in, and there are a lot of directors and instructors in here that actually did ask about how to do that for your students or with your students, developing a scheme. So Timpanist, let me hear from you on how you do that, what you recommend.
My best advice is, especially because that's when it comes down to more of like a high-end level of timpani playing. We're talking drum corps territory here.
Well, no, even a lot of high school stuff doesn't have the stuff written in, and then high schoolers get overwhelmed because they don't know when to do their changes.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, we're kind of easing towards that. Like, I mean, even like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I think my best advice for that is for every timpanist to figure that out, like what the best scheming is. Play scales. Like, try, like, even if you only have 4 drums, then it's not possible to play all 12 major scales on just 4 drums. But just try doing that, and you'll really figure out very quickly, like, the coordination between, okay, what can I do sticking wise that can kind of work to play around different pitches while I'm pedaling, and like, that's going to kind of give you the coordination between the pedal and hand motion, all that goodness. Playing with scales is going to reveal all of that, and then it'll kind of translate into that melodic part of timpani playing, because that teaches you, okay, even though I don't have the pitches written down on the sheet music, you know, I've been playing these scales, so I can have like a certain idea of like where these need to go based off my past experience. That's kind of my answer to that, and I only say that because my freshman year I was put on timpani right away, and my percussion director right off the bat told me to play all 12 major scales right off the bat, like day one of mini band camp, right? He's like, why can't you play all 12 major scales? I'm like, I've never played timpani. I don't know what I'm doing. So he kind of intimidated me and launched me into learning the scales. He's a kind of an intimidating director. And so I like went home and scrambled and wrote like a tuning scheme for all 12 major scales. And that was, I'm not saying if you're a director, do that to your kid. You're going to traumatize them for the rest of their lives. But I think that's a pretty engaging way to get them to think about all that coordination. Even if they don't do it right, you know, like I think that's just a kind of a shortcut to get into that world of, you know, knowing where the pitches go on the drums.
You know, for something that's sort of intermediate, maybe like a high school, maybe an undergraduate college level kind of piece, you tend to have either tonics, super tonics, like you have 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. These pitches are probably the ones that are going to be on your drums. There might be some light changes, but there tend to always be some form of a dominant tonic kind of thing. So I always favor at least trying to leave those important pitches like firmly on the drums if I can, and not tune into them. I can tune away from them. Like if we're in C major, I would never go like B natural into a C, because I need that C to be right because everybody's about to play it, if that kind of makes sense. Like it just feels like a fundamental thing that should be there. But I might do something like C to D and tune away from it because that's a little bit more forgiving. Does that kind of make sense? So I tend to find those like, there's pillar pitches, and it might not be dominant or a tonic. It could be something else, but you know, depending on the context, I'm going to figure out like, where's the ensemble going to land with me where it absolutely should be right, and which pitches are maybe a little bit more forgiving, and let that kind of drive a little bit of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go off of what Juan said a little bit on the scales. That I always find that that's super helpful in like understanding the drums and understanding the ranges of the drums a little bit, and also just kind of getting a good sense of like in the ear of like what sounds better on what drum, because like obviously you have 2 or 3 different versions of one pitch, so just kind of getting a good understanding of like getting some sort of unified sound going up and down the scale.
Yeah. Are we directing this right now towards like advanced playing or more beginner intermediate? Just so I have an understanding.
More of a beginner intermediate. There are a few drum corps timpanists in here. You know, I see Thomas. What's up, man? Isai as well. But at the same time, there are a lot of instructors here who are teaching high school and middle school. And really, you know, so that question came from, I once went to do a master class, and my whole master class got derailed because I found out the students had no idea how to develop a tuning scheme, really. And, you know, there are a lot of band directors here, and I think for them, they also need to know how to help their students do it. You know, I think you can easily sit down with your timpanist and just, the best way to do it is just, all right, so what notes do we start with? What notes do we need to start with? And then where do we need to have a change? And like, let's go over to the drums. Where might that sit well? And all 5 of us on this panel and all the other timpanists in this room have different ways of writing that. At the beginning, oh God, you guys should see my notes for when I first got my crown music. You can hardly see the sheet music because it's just like 26 down to B natural, and like on every note there's a change. And eventually I got to what Juan was saying, because of all the scales I was playing, I could just read it. You know, how do you get good at trumpet? How do you get good at tuba? you just play music, you play scales, and eventually you remember that, you know, this fingering is this fingering is that. And I guess that's exactly what ended up happening for me with timpani. So I hope that clears that up.
Yeah,
for you
I was
all.
going to also mention, I think in all the times that I've ever looked at middle school, high school, any level of college, professional music, it seems like it just goes with the level of performance as well. Like the composers seem to be pretty in tune with, no pun intended, with like how many drums and how many pitch changes should happen for a sixth grader versus somebody that's, say, a college undergrad. You know what I mean? So you might only have 3 different pitches in middle school. Could be B flat, F, and E flat. You know what I mean? And the band is over here and they're just moving all sorts of keys and stuff, but you have your 3 pitches because they want you to just focus on the hands, to what Jim was saying earlier with the easy parts, you know? Yeah, I think the other part of that, you know, Jim was talking about like a C natural can go on 2 different drums. So I don't know, a lot of times I kind of have a default way of thinking of like that C natural on the 29, because it is a much tighter head, it's physically tighter. You can get a much more articulate kind of sound. So if I firm up my grip, if I use a harder mallet and I'm on the 29, like I'm over staccatoing this thing in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Like if that's the effect that I'm going for, I kind of think of it default that way. But if I need a more legato kind of C natural, I'm going to go over to the 26, to his point, and try to use the tension of the drum to help emphasize and go along with the articulation and the tone and the length of the pitch and everything else that I'm trying to get.
Yeah, and it's not to get off on to derail ourselves, but it kind of, maybe that's the point of this all, but that's also why, like when you get to samples versus real, if you have a choice, those are something like you don't have, particularly when you're talking about rolls, you don't have really a choice of, unless you're making the samples yourself, of what drum that was rolled on and how it was done, the mallet choice, and that kind of roll speed adjustment on that particular pitch on that particular drum, which are all those human factors that we kind of do instantaneously by just listening and adjusting, that, you know, synthetically you're not ever really going to quite do that unless you're making your own gigantic sample library for each specific situation. So,
you know, and one other thing, we were talking about like intermediate basic kind of tuning schemes and how to come up with those. And I'm just thinking, like, I think I've always gone through a part with a student and looked at like, okay, what are all the different pitches here? You can start to figure out that there's sort of an anchor 2 or 3 pitches that are just kind of always there. And then there's like 1 or 2 that just kind of come back every so often. So I think I find those anchors, leave them set as much as possible, and then figure out like, okay, which one can move? You know what I mean? Try to do the least amount of moving. Obviously, the more advanced the player is, the more moving they can get because the nuance of what we're talking about here, and being able to favor one drum over another if one pitch can go on multiple drums, you know? But again, if we're talking beginner, intermediate players, a lot of times the scheme is done for you. You know what I mean? Like if you have an F, B flat, C, F, you don't really get a choice, especially in the 7th grade classroom. You're not going to be moving those around. You just set them.
Yeah. As much as like I would want to probably do that on 3 drums, just because I hate the sound of an F on a 23.
Right.
I've actually been in that, like I've been looking at like a middle school part and I was like, oh, I hate how this sounds, but I'll let you do it because that's going to be the easiest educationally. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would
great
say,
stuff.
you know,
Great stuff.
Yeah, I think, and that's all, you know, again, it's like at that age, we're developing some different things. And even if they're developing the confidence in playing, that's great. And I would say to the writers, as you're doing this, if, you know, how you can help that develop as far as getting the right pitches on the right drums when you want, again, is leaving that recovery time in there in the book. So if they're playing continuously, they're going to have less choices and less ability to adjust. If you build in 4 bars of retune, readjust, then you can get the pitches you want on the drums you want.
I think to add to that, Jim, is just also paying attention to the tempos that you have.
Yeah.
Because 2 measures to retune at 172 is very different than 2
Yeah.
at 72.
Yeah.
So
And
making
that's-
sure that
yeah.
according to whoever's actually playing the drums, if they really need a long time and you're at 172, it might be 16 bars. You know what I mean? Like that goes pretty fast.
Yeah, I think it can be a whole phrase, and that's fine. If you have a bass guitar or a synth, great. They can cover all that stuff, and then you can, when that timpani voice comes back in, your ear is going to be drawn to it, and that's a good thing. So
I think it's absolutely nuts how many factors there are into making a tuning scheme. There's so many factors, like not even just the tempo, which is a huge factor always, but then there's sticking, there's what actually sounds good. Do you want some pitches to ring over, or do you want it to just pedal over and it's just going to cancel the other note? Like for example, if you have a E to an F, do you want to play that on 2 different drums, or do you want to just play it on the same drum so that way when you pedal it up to an F, then that E goes away by default just because it doesn't exist anymore in the sound, But that also comes with a choice, are there multiple times when it goes from E to F, or is it just once, like there's so many different things to factor, and a lot of it just comes from musical taste. There's not like a right or wrong answer as well. It's like, well, what sounds good? At the end of the day, that's all that's important about music is, does it sound good? And the judge doesn't care if your pedaling scheme was kind of whack. Like nobody ever talks about that ever. So
Can I share a tool that's been super useful and it's like the most basic thing ever? Oh my God, my virtual background's not going to work, is it?
Uh-oh.
Oh no! Why won't it work?
reveal your background.
There it is. Oh my God. It's
Is
basic.
it the quadrant?
It's the plus sign. So like the bottom left is a 32, the top left is 29, top right is 26, bottom right is 23. So you basically write a plus sign at your tuning changes, and you just write the number, write the pitch. There it is.
Like that.
Yeah, you write the pitch just above the bar where the change is going to be made.
I've actually never seen that. I'm so surprised I've never seen that.
Really?
I got a book from somebody. We were playing.
I just don't prefer it.
Oh,
Yeah, I've definitely seen it. I've gone through a million different ways that I prefer, and even at one point I was writing like left foot 2 spaces over, and like right foot left. Yeah, it was a lot.
Well, for the composers in the room, like the only reason I bring this up, it's like if you just put 32 above it, or sorry, not 32, but if you just if you put a B natural above something, well, I don't know where the B natural goes. You know what I mean? Like some people put B natural dash C to say like I'm going from B natural to a C. But then again, it's like, okay, well, what drum is that going on? At least a tool like this for me tells me exactly what drum it's going to and when. That's the only reason I bring that up. Takes some of the question marks out of it. Somebody in the comments had a question though. Perry Lee was saying that like the drum doesn't go to an F.
Yeah, a lot. So like, for example, I did Ludwig in my indoor group, and the Ludwig range is a lot smaller than what I have on a Yamaha. And then you also have like the climate that you're in. Here at Florida, all of these drums go over an octave in range. And then when I went to North Carolina for my first audition, it was cold, and I only had like the standard 5th of a range. So yeah, a lot of 26s don't actually reach that F.
That always sounds to me like, I was going to say, it sounded like it's just not in range. Maybe it's just not been tuned.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah,
I mean,
it can definitely just be it's too low. But I've had 126. I tried. It had a really old head, and once you brought it up to an F, the range went down to about a third.
That just sounds like a bad head. Yeah, right?
It was definitely a bad head.
Yeah.
Your 26 should be B flat to F. It should comfortably hit that F. But again, if you have an old head or you're not in range, you're not going to hit it.
Yeah, with at least here in the Delaware area, like if I didn't have the 26, so it could get to an F and maybe like an F plus or so, it would be to the point where the balanced action would get thrown out, you know, so that the pedal would start creeping up, you know what I mean? Because it's trying to tighten itself. So, yeah, that's an interesting thing. I learned something.
Yeah. I actually, I was fixing some timpani right before COVID, and I was like on the phone with Lucas for such a long time because these drums had been in the wrong range for so long that the springs had tightened up in a way that all of the ranges with the new heads I put on had to be higher than the standard ranges, or else you'd run into the pedal slipping. And it didn't make any sense to me. But unfortunately, if you leave your drums in the wrong range for 10 years, it's probably going to happen. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on a little bit from the arranging side of things. We definitely touched on you know, some things you can do to work on your pedaling and your tuning. But we're getting a little touch into the day in the life. So we had some question on what's involved for your average timpanist, as far as, you know, how do you move drums? What maintenance do you have to do on the field as far as like clearing heads? What is involved in a regular rehearsal? So maybe let's start with Juan on that one.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, my story is a little different than a lot of timpanists. It's unfair, but you know, I have perfect pitch, and sometimes it's a curse. But you know, when I'm in a water break, sometimes like, I mean, I'm a firm believer in hydrating, but sometimes I'll take the water breaks off and I'll just clear heads like crazy while everybody else is doing other things. Or if the front ensemble tech is talking to somebody else, I'll be just clearing heads as constantly as possible, because weather changes, you know, like it can be hot one moment, or there can be a cloud, and it literally affects it like by about 50 cents. I don't know, you know, and I'm always just constantly clearing heads. And I guess for those of you that don't know what clearing heads means, you know, that means you get out a timpani key. They only make them for timpani, and you have to go around each drum, and there's like a particular way to do it. You have to go whatever lug you're starting with, you start here, and then you go across, and then you go to the side, and then this, and then
it's like putting a tire on a car. You do a star pattern.
Right. The star pattern. And you just do that like crazy. And if you don't have perfect pitch, obviously you can play timpani. Get out a tuning pipe, get out your phone or whatever that has a tuner app, and put it right next to your drum, and just constantly clear it. And that's really the only maintenance things you have to do on a day-to-day basis. But every once in a while, like maybe once a week or once a month on tour, you'll have something go wrong with your pedal. For some reason, we have this timpani chat on Facebook, and we always make fun of 23-inch Yamahas, or just 23 inches in general, because something always happens to the 23-inch pedal in the season. I don't know who's had a season without that happening, but something happens, and you have to like put the drum on the floor and then go into the pedal mechanism and clean it out, or do something, or fix the Teflon tape. Those are just a few of the maintenance things you have to do there. And then there's also some head changes if you have the privilege to get those every once in a while. And that's just taking a block off or something like that, or doing it before or after rehearsal and changing out the heads. And that will actually take about 2 hours for 5 drums. I mean, it's different for everybody depending on your experience, but there's also a lot of that stuff going on. And then, you know, and then there's also similar things to like mallet players, you know, you also have to take care of your mallets. You have to rewrap them, or ask your director if you can get some new mallets, if you broke it, if you can do that as well. And I mean, that's kind of about it. For my question is I guess for the timpanist and the panel, what okay, I'll get back to that question. It's a little bit complicated. I'll find a better way to phrase it. But,
You're trying to switch roles and it's not working.
yeah.
So I'll hop in too, if that's cool. Jim, you were talking about like the overwhelm that a lot of students tend to have at the instrument, especially students that are being asked to do it that fancy themselves a keyboard player or something else. Yeah. So I've always found that the most frustrating thing seems to be maintenance. These are some of the most expensive pieces of equipment we have in our band rooms, and it's some of the least understood, the most misunderstood even by percussionists, and the most abused instruments that we have, leading to some of the most frustration we can have as percussionists on the playing side, And as we're talking about going outdoors and we're talking about being in tune and having to play in time, as being the only thing that we get to actually tune and perform, there's just a lot of responsibility there. So I think eliminating as much frustration as possible on the mechanical side is super important. Stephen, you talked about I wrote my dissertation on this stuff because I had a passion for this stuff. Just like seeing all the students going through all these issues and being super frustrated with stuff. Band directors not knowing what to do and instructors not quite sure what to do. And 9 times out of 10, we're doing the wrong things as far as maintenance. And I know you're going to have a totally different panel about this, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too far. But I feel like we can't get to the performing until they're actually doing what we need them to do for us so that we can have an enjoyable and positive experience, So Juan's talking about the maintenance side. I think that's super important. You roll into the ensemble setting, if you can get the drums out there before rehearsal and get them acclimated to whatever the temperature is about to be, or indoors to whatever that rehearsal environment's going to be, to let the plastic heads actually come to temperature and do what they're going to do, whether that's stretch or relax. I think that's important. And I think the first thing to always do is actually put them in range. Once they're actually in the environment that they're going to be in, and they're set in the place they're going to be, and they're not going to be moved anymore, is to actually put them in the range they're supposed to be. So in a 32, it should be D to A, 29, F to C, B flat to F on 26, D to A again on 23, F to C on the 20. And I know there's a million schools of thought, so I'm giving my one person perspective on it. I always just check the top pitch because the bottoms we tend not to use as much. So I'm always checking the A on a 32 or a C on a 29. You know what I mean? Because we love having the pedals off the floor because that's where we get more tone and stuff anyway. So if I know that I have a C on top of my 29, I know all my pitches are going to be there. So first, I think is super important to put it in range to make sure you have all the notes that are supposed to be on the drums. And then I know this one's super bad for a lot of people, but is use a drum dial. I was super maniacal about this stuff, and I know people always made fun of me, and especially in 08 when I had it. But I always got really great compliments from just using the thing. People are, there's the traditionalist. I know that orchestral players in the room are like, what in the world are you talking about using a drum dial? What? Use your ear, man. Show up to the concert hall 4 hours early, right? And it's well, when you're next to an 18-wheeler, you don't get to hear anything.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you're talking about. You need a visual, physics is physics too. You know what I mean? It's either the same readout or it's not. And if it's the same readout, then it's going to sound the same. And I've never had that fail me. So I've always been kind of curious why the argument against a drum dial is out there. But I think a drum dial is super important to get it clear so that you have the best pitch possible out there. Anyway, so quick review. Get the thing in the environment it should be in. Get the thing in range so that you know the notes are going to be there, and then clear it so it's going to sound great. And then, like Juan was saying, take your sip during rehearsal, but then do it all again because that cloud's coming. Or if it's 2 hours into rehearsal, well, it went from sunny to dark, you got to just continually update them.
Yeah.
Yeah, you actually, Brandon, I'm sorry, Stephen, but Brandon literally touched on my question, which was when you're clearing, what preference do you have? Do you want to tune it to the top of the drum or the middle of the drum? And my philosophy, I always thought, because I didn't really ask anybody until 2018, I didn't ask anybody about that. I always just assumed everybody did to the top note. But then I was hanging out with my friend John, who was the timpanist for the Blue Knights, and he tunes them to the bottom note, and that blew my mind. I was like, how does anybody do that? So he actually sets the pedal all the way to the bottom of the timpani, and then that's how he clears it. And that was crazy to me, and it ended up actually having a completely different sound than I did, which, well, I mean, in my opinion, it had a different sound. I mean, maybe most people.
I love the idea of doing it at the bottom. My problem with that has always been, by the time I make it to the top, the variance between lug to lug is greater. You know what I mean? So when the pedal's at the bottom, it might be clear, but by the time that plastic is stretched, it's now many cents difference between at the top. So that's why I've always done it in the middle, where it's just kind of riding in between. It's going to be a tiny bit different at the top, tiny bit different at the bottom, but it's pretty close. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Let me counter you on that, actually. So when I was taught in the middle. So for example, like a 29, if it's F to C, you're going to tune for the A, and that's just because you're usually going to use middle to upper range of the drum. And as you tighten, the difference between each lug actually gets smaller, right? So if you're tuning at the top, if I'm tuning at the top C to clear, and then I go down, that stretch actually, I think, is larger when you go down. So then when the first new set of drums I actually got to look at, I looked at the manual, and all the manuals say to tune from the lowest note. So I was like, that's pretty interesting, but the lowest note is very hard to hear sometimes. So I have a 3-point system where I start at the bottom, and then I'll go to the middle, and I'll re-clear, and then I'll get the fine tuning at the top if I can't hear it, and then I'll go through all three again very quickly for the top three. But like, that's one of the reasons that before shows I'm so stressed out. And Juan was like, I only tune my drums once. And I'm sitting there, and I have, like, as soon as I bring the drums off the truck, as soon as I get to the lot, as soon as I leave the lot and I'm on the trailer, and right before I go on the field, I'm going crazy about my drum sound. Because, teachers, I'm going to call someone out right now. I won't say their name, but they're in here in this Zoom. I once helped them roll their marching band out on the field. And I was like, hey, did you guys clear your timpani? Do you need help? And they're like, what's that? And I found out that they've never touched their timpani tuning. And meanwhile, it was really moist outside that day. So I was like, it's going to be different. And of course, the drums didn't sound great. But right before, in drum corps, we go to an indoor stadium. And like, if you're doing BOA or something and you go to an indoor stadium, or if you have a rained out show and you go to basketball, your drums are going to go lower in range. And as a teacher, you have to help your student, because they're going to get really overwhelmed if they have no idea what to do with the tuning and the maintenance. And that's why people are turned off from timpani. Right. So as a teacher, I think either you need to work with your students so that they can be autonomous on it, or, if you have a front ensemble tech that can do it, they need to be available, like, right before a show to help the student tune those timpani. Because if not, well, if you're relying on the gauges, you're not going to be in tune for the whole show. And then why are you using the drums? Right.
So, yeah, I was going to say, I'm curious. So, obviously, whenever we're going, whether this is high school or drum corps, doesn't matter. But if you're going from, say, a 7 p.m. warm up, and then your gate time is 8:30 or something, usually it's still warm and daylight, and then it's nighttime and much cooler. So you're constantly just going around and tightening, because it's just starting to sag and you got to go up. I recall only, like, really doing the clearing in the lot, maybe like the first time, maybe twice, maybe one time before we start moving to the gate. You know what I mean? But at least right before warm-ups, I would clear. And then the rest of the night I was cranking up. And then just making sure that, like, my gauge where it said B flat, I'm just always going back up with, always checking my C on top of, like, a 29, right? Making sure my range is still there. Fixing the gauge, making sure it's still going to read right for me, but not always clearing. Are you guys saying that you were, like, clearing constantly as well, going around and checking all that stuff?
I am doing that. And then only if I hear it. So I got really picky with the sound of my drums, and, like, Really, Anthony was the only tech that would really just tell me like, hey, excuse my language, but he was like, hey, Steven, your drums sound like shit today. And I was like, oh, thank you. You know, that was just because my ears were tired because I was tuning so much. And I was constantly like, for all you educators, the app Pitch, it's just Pitch. It's really great, picks up the low end very well. So I was constantly going around with that app and just making sure, yeah, Lucas is holding it up, making sure that, like Brandon said, I had one note, you know, I was going from the middle of the range. I was making sure that the note I used the most on that drum was correct, because that allows me to just make sure that like my whole gauge is somewhat accurate. But I was doing a lot of clearing as well, and sometimes too much, obviously, because as weather changes, the small adjustments I would make would get bigger. So you know, there were some really hot days where I was like every 10 minutes trying to re-clear my drums, because I didn't want Michael Klesch or Matt Harloff to call me out on like not being in tune with the brass.
Yeah. I just want to shout out Thomas for his comment. I love the Alamo, keeps you busy. It's so true. I think if anybody's ever had any experience with the Alamo Dome, or about to, just tune up a half step before you go in there, because they'll drop real quick. Yeah.
I was going to say one more thing about clearing too. I think it was always important to tune thinking of like what key you're playing a lot in. You know, I mean, you find yourself playing a lot of B flats and Fs in drum corps just because of the nature of the activity. So always making sure that those pitches were clear.
Right. Having those as the top priority on the list. Or if you're Carolina Crown or anything like that, all of them, you know?
So I do want to leave some time for questions. And I know we didn't grab all of the topics. I do want to hit two things very quickly because there were so many questions. Anthony, I want to ask you this. About 5 people asked what mics you might use on Timpani if your school is privileged enough to do that. And I want to see where you're at with that, since you're such an electronic guy.
I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's what we used at Crown last year. Were they the Sennheisers?
Yeah, so it's the Sennheiser's drum set mics, and
902s
it's great because
602s or 902s.
I was going to say it's either the 602s or the 902s. Those
I've used the 602s.
Like the 602s are like the less expensive one.
Yeah.
But it's a large diaphragm dynamic mic.
Yeah, those tend to pick up a lot of tend to pick up the tone really well, as well as the attack. So it's like a good all around kind of like gets a little bit of everything in there. But yeah, just a really good range of like what it actually picks up. So that's definitely my my recommendation there. Until I got to Crown last year, I've never actually mic'd Timpani. I've never really had to, but that was definitely like right away. I kind of knew like, oh yeah, that has to be the go-to microphone for that application.
Anybody else feel like amplification? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you go.
Oh, I was going to say, I was just thinking about like the impact that amplifications had on timpani playing in the activity. Just, you know, I remember, you know, in 06 and 08, it's like, yeah, there was sound reinforcement and stuff, but it certainly isn't what it is today. And back then it was a lot of impact moments, a lot of rhythmic playing and that kind of thing. And today you can be so much more nuanced and orchestral and graceful in the instrument, which is really cool. Just because it, you know, the actual resonance can carry for much, much longer. So I think there's just a nice crossover between the ways of playing, and it's not really this like you choose one or the other.
Well, it also allows you to kind of modify the sound as well. I know a lot of sound designers in the marching arts world that will like take time to EQ their timpani just the way they wanted. And so maybe they'll raise up the high end to get a little bit more articulation in certain parts, or totally get rid of the high end if they really want that dark resonant sound. So I think there's a lot of debate on whether like amplifying timpani is necessary. I'm saying if you can afford it, I would, just because it might be great for those solo moments that you want timpani to be featured in. But if you can't afford it, it's not necessary. I think it's like a totally valid instrument that can project well. I mean, needless to say, it's loud. You know?
Yeah, usually timpani will either have like one mic between the 29 and 32, and then one mic between the 26 and 23. So you only have two mics. However, you know, the ones we used at Crown, the Sennheisers, those are drum set mics. So they easily click on the hoop, and I was able to, you know, like wrap my cabling around the struts so that all I had to do as soon as I got on the field was like unvelcro a cable loop and like plug everything into the mixer, which was a very efficient way. And I ended up doing the same thing at STRYKE. But it's definitely an option. And if you don't have that option, and you're looking to get your timpani louder, I know Thomas is going to hate me for this, but I would actually recommend using some timpani marching mallets. For example, like the Vic Firth Core Masters here, right? These are indestructible, essentially. You know, maybe the wrapping will get dark, but the wrapping is really tight and it's super strong. The shaft is nice and weighty and will basically never go dead unless you're using it to like click things. So I only use them in the large moments because I had my amplification. Usually I was just using either like Tim Jennis line, which is great. I'm sorry, I'm Vic Firth completely. So this is all I can show you. Or like the American Customs, I use these ultra staccatos for like 70% of my show, to get that articulation. So, you know, as far as saving costs, you know, it's okay to get your timpanist the marching timpani mallets, in my opinion. They don't sound the best, but they're going to last you the longest. And we all know how expensive timpani mallets are. And it's going to give you that added volume in case you have a large band and you can't afford amplification. Anyone else want to touch on this mallet situation?
Well, you were talking about things are, you know, they can get dirty and everything else. It's like, I think after every rehearsal, another maintenance thing would be to just clean heads, use some Windex or something, just get all that hand grease and sweat and everything off of it so it doesn't end up back on your mallets. And I always like that trick of putting mallets in the corners of two like sandwich bags and wrapping it around each other. Really protect the heads. I don't know. Anyway, quick tip.
I like using the corner of like a black towel or something, dipping in water and kind of scrubbing that around the rims just to get that gunk out of the drums for cleaning the heads. I think a lot of people don't clean their heads because they'll see that their top is fine, but underneath the rim, which is the most important part because that's where you get all that little clutter sound and it distorts the sound, it's hidden away so you can't see it. So I, even every hour or so in the season, you know, I'll just do a little scrub around the rims just to make sure that they're clean. I don't know if anybody else kind of does that like all the time.
Yeah, and definitely always putting them in some sort of bag. Like the bag they come in is perfect, or like Brandon said, a Ziploc. I was fortunate in drum corps not to have to carry my bags around. I just stuck them in my stick bag, and I had enough pairs throughout the season to have like, I had like a rain set in case it was raining. They were destroyed already, but it was what I was going to use. And then I had my practice and my show, which was fantastic. But I understand that it's not possible for a lot of schools. We're definitely going to dive more into mallet selection in the next clinic. So right before the Q&A, I want to ask this last question that was asked a lot. How do you, as educators, because you're all educators on this panel, develop interest for timpani, develop that culture and really like raise them young to believe that timpani is an option and it's not just, you know, go to snare drum or go to marimba?
Sorry, I feel like I'm jumping in first. I apologize.
Go for it.
But yeah, Jim, again, drawing from what he said earlier, I think there's a lot of non-timpani players that really, if you can find some parallels from the things they really enjoy and bring them over, I think that's great. A lot of keyboard players seem to enjoy singing. They enjoy the melodic nature of playing a marimba or a vibraphone. So there's something about singing and being vocal that tends to carry over. So obviously that goes straight into the tuning and ear training and everything of that nature. So maybe working in some vocal kind of things, some singing to sort of reinforce what's going on with the ear training for a keyboard player. There's also a lot of people that are they're snare drum heads. They just love playing quads or something like that. And they get in the percussion ensemble and they're like, I have to tune this. I just spent all marching band not having to think of a pitch at all. And now I have to tune this. So, again, maybe finding a piece that has some fixed pitches on it where maybe it's not too much tuning, but something that really feeds that interest of playing multiple instruments and working on hand stuff, but actually does have the pitches involved in there, even if they are set, to get them starting to think melodically, if that makes sense. And maybe even some ensemble like warm-up singing, I think, can be useful. Matching pitch as a group and doing something, before rehearsal starts, and just really grooming people from the ground up for doing that.
Yeah, I think part of it for me, as a writer, I want to make sure that I'm writing parts that they're gonna see as people are coming into the program. They're gonna see there's a tradition of, good timpani parts that people will enjoy playing, and that they'll see that and this is real important, that the timpanist is incorporated into the exercise program, and they're a part of the whole package, that the gear is maintained and taken care of, the mallets are maintained and taken care of, so that when they come in, it's like, oh, wow, this instrument is in as good a condition as this marimba or this vibraphone, and the mallets are taken care of, and it's an important part, and kind of hyping that solo position, because it is a solo instrument. But I think my biggest thing is that in a lot of schools, at least in I'll talk about my region, a lot of the only real hands-on percussion training they're getting is from their techs and marching band. And it's not the tech's job to make this person a well-rounded, perfect percussionist. It's their job to get that percussion ensemble, that snare line or whatever, to be great for that season. Then it's the band director's job to take all the percussionists from the band who are in concert band and get them rotated through all those instruments. So maybe working with band directors to say, hey, the snare drummer needs to play some keyboards and needs to start singing and needs to start playing timpani. And you know what? Sometimes they just need a little push in that direction. Like Brandon was saying, hey, yeah, maybe there's a percussion ensemble piece where it's very drummy style timpani playing without a lot of tuning changes, and it's something as a snare drummer or a bass drummer they can really relate to and get into, and then all of a sudden that's the kind of gateway to like, okay, now maybe you can try in the wind ensemble, you can try this part, so I think all that's important.
Anthony?
They both got it all. They both got what I had.
Sorry, you took out your mic at the beginning, so I wanted you to go.
Oh no, I'm good
Juan,
now.
Anything on that?
For me, on top of all that they said, which is really, really awesome. For me, my experience was I started playing timpani in 2013, so I like looking stuff up. I looked it up on YouTube, like, is there like a timpani cam? And at that time, there was only one. It was the 2012 Boston Crusaders Diana Loomer timpani cam, and that changed my life forever. I was like, whoa, they can do all that stuff. It was playing Respighi Pines of Realms on timpani. It went all on timpani. I was like, okay, this is a legit instrument right off the bat. And I guess just showing kids something as complicated as that it has that much potential, it will first of all frighten them. But I think that's a good thing. And two, it will hype them up. It's like, oh, I thought I could just play 4 notes or whatever. And it instantly brings up the possibilities. there's now after 2012, now there's so many head cams. Obviously, Stevens multicam is a great reference, and there's so many.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great, man. There's so many head cams out there, and there's a lot of pedal cams, and it's definitely something worth saying that if you're playing marimba, if you're playing snare, you're playing any other thing, you're using your hands. But I like to tell young timpanists that it's 90% about what the feet do, which is sort of true. And it kind of makes them feel special. It's like, I'm unique, kind of like a harpist as well that uses their feet all the time. It lets them kind of explore more things that they do, that they can do as a percussionist. And I want to say timpani's the best instrument, but I'm not going to say that.
One thing we didn't really touch on to that point is actually pitch changes and the physicality of that. We talk so much about touching the drum or touching some sort of thing as a reference pitch or listening to the tubas behind you. But there, for Diana to be able to play that lick or to play Planet Damnation, the Sathas piece or anything like that, there's no such thing as listening to a reference pitch. You're feeling it all the way through your feet. Mm-hmm. So understanding what is a half step and a whole step and a minor, like all this stuff, like what do these things feel like in your feet? And like one suggestion I always have is, somebody said play scales. I always think that the easiest one is maybe an F major scale. Leave your left foot on the 29, your right on the 26. You got a fifth on the left foot. You got a fifth on the right foot. They mirror each other. You could even do them in fifths if you wanted to on the way down. The intervals themselves mirror each other, being a whole half. You know what I mean? So there's that nice thing. And you don't have to worry about having 4 drums or anything like that or anything wacky, but you get to really just focus on what does a whole step feel like versus that half step.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, even for hours, I remember at Crown, even on tour, just bum, 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 60 clicks a minute, bum, bum, and really reinforcing those intervals and really memorizing the feel and not using the ear as much for some of that stuff.
Yeah, and I love using the hand sign as kind of like as an educational tool. Like if I'm teaching a timpanist, I like say they're going too sharp for like one note, like, okay, here's a half step. And then here's a whole step, right? And like you kind of show them that, or you go like, oh no, that's a little sharp. Like so, like if I'm like far away from them, I'll be like little sharp, or like if they're flat, little flat, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that gets them hyped up too. It's like, oh, that's kind of special. Like it's like our little sign language between us. Nobody else knows what we're talking about. We look like mad scientists.
Something cool too is like lip slurs for brass. Like if you're with the horn line or something, doing lip slurs on timpani are actually kind of cool. Because you get you go from tiny to massive, you know what I mean? And you really have to control it. And it, unlike anything else where you kind of want to slide into it, like practicing just that snapping motion, getting straight to it is super important,
Yeah.
I always had like...
And letting them know, is it too glissy or is it...
Yeah.
Does it sound good,
Well, and to that point, like whenever you're just starting this, I always found that students had an issue playing and listening at the same time and moving the foot and trying to concentrate on the feel because they were distracted by when to hit. So I always thought, like, again, if your met is on 60 and you just hit one time and then you just move the pedal and no longer hit, you eliminate the gliss because that's all you have left is resonance. You know what I mean? So it's like, da, you're not articulating each one of those. You're just letting it ring. Does that make sense? It fades away kind of fast, but at least it emphasizes, are we glissing or not? Does that kind of make sense? It's hard to tell in this environment if I'm making some sense. I'm sorry.
No, we all sound like crazy people, but
I think all of you came here tonight because timpani is so elusive, and you either you didn't get the education or you're deficient on it a little bit. Which thank you for coming, but I always think you can relate anything you do on a different instrument to this. So as far as gathering interest, like Juan said, like I'll send you guys, both Juan and myself, timpani cams from the past few years, and check them out. I'll send you Bailey from the Bluecoats and Isaac from Cavaliers, and develop interests, and you have that diversity there to show your students, like, you can do it as well. As far as exercises, a whole bunch of people keep asking about exercises. Just use what you give the wind players: scales, slurs, da 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 da, and like constantly just working on that pedaling. And anything, if you were to think of the different articulations you want, that's the different mallets for us, different stroke types. Everything for timpani can be related to the instruments that right? Just think about it. And I love using wind players warm-ups on timpani. If I'm walking in the practice room building and I hear something that I'm like, ooh, that might be good, it's really challenging for my feet, and I love working on that. So first of all, I have really enjoyed this discussion, and I got to thank all of the panelists again for coming out and doing this, and all of the audience as well. Let's I know we're a little over time, but we could do a Q&A right now if everyone wants to stick around for a bit. If you have to go, I understand. Yeah, who's got questions? Just pop them in the chat. I know there was one already about the difference between classical and marching timpani. Brandon definitely addressed that well. It's really all in the pedaling, and you may change a few things as far as your technique, but the pedaling demand is, I think, my biggest difference.
Yeah, and kind of like what I was talking about earlier with the amplification, it allows the hands in that general approach from indoors to come outdoors and not have to be this real, it's either this or it's that, or like two ways to play the instrument. Like you just play the instrument the same way. And it's funny, I said that, like, for anybody that may not be able to see, I put in the chat kind of an explanation of this, but I mean, band music is getting complicated. John Mackey is all over Facebook always just talking about like how he's just making his stuff like crazy. And of course, every generation is able to do stuff that previous couldn't. So it's just going to continue to compound and get more difficult. So, the stuff is just getting more choppy. So the stuff that we're doing outdoors is creeping indoors right now, very much so. And the solo literature is creeping up too. So it's not like this is a just outdoor thing with the pedaling. This is very much happening in our band literature.
And I think not just the technical demands timpani wise as far as pedaling and playing, but I think in drum corps, at least the trend I've seen the last 5-6 years, our rhythmic vocabulary is changing too. Someone wrote in a meme on Facebook like the fivelet is the new triplet, and that's kind of true. Like now in writing, especially like with Travis's writing at Crown and stuff, where inside that fivelet are all these permutations of like what you used to see on other rhythms, and you're like, that's intense, and you hear it played and it's like, that sounds completely unique. And or where, okay, now the pulse isn't the quarter or the eighth, it's the dotted eighth, and there's permutations within that and subdivisions within that, and it's like, so that is expanding as well. And that's, I think a lot of the battery writers are trying to find their own voice, so they're exploring that way. As keyboard players, we're exploring with our technical demands and trying to challenge the timpanists, and trying to, we have now even the people who are triggering samples are sitting there, looking at this flashing pad going, okay, this is my life for the next 3 months. And, there's a lot to that too. You're in the hot seat doing that. So yeah, everyone's being challenged for sure. Yeah. Any other questions here? I know we didn't touch everything. If you're looking for more of the, I hope you found this helpful. I really enjoyed this. If you're looking for more of the day-to-day stuff, mallet choices, exercises to work on pedaling, how to exactly write a tuning scheme, how to maintain your drums, how to transport your drums. The next Zoom we're going to have in a couple of weeks is going to be like a lot of the 2019 guys, from a whole bunch of different corps. We're probably going to have Lucas, who's here, to talk about maintenance a lot. So I encourage you all to come to that. And I will be sending you all, as soon as I can, a YouTube link for this meeting.
if technology works, then it saves for me. As well as, links for my timpani cam, Juan's Learn the Music with Vic Firth, and whatever resources that I may find that we talked about in here to send you. I'll send that to anyone who registered. So if you didn't register, just shoot me a quick email. Any last minute questions before we say goodnight? I don't want to keep anyone too long.
I had a random thought just a moment ago, but just thinking, talking to a timpanist as an instructor, a lot of times, especially if you're getting into a player that can actually do some pedaling and that stuff, talking in a more physical sense, rather than saying like you're sharp or something, but like you move too far on that last one, I think sometimes is useful. You know what I mean? Because that actually is a tangible physical thing that they can feel. You know what I mean? So like, don't go as far to that C the next time, rather than saying that C was sharp. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think to the player, that physicality is important to speak to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And
Anthony used to do that a lot.
But also for me, there's also like, you don't have to know, exactly how minor third interval feels or major third interval feels. I mean, it's great if you know that, but also you can find shortcuts within your book as well about that stuff. Like if you're going all the way to the top of your drum, just slam the pedal and you'll get there. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to even think about, okay, it's a perfect fourth interval. Just get to the top there. And you can find shortcut things like that. And obviously you have to do a little bit of score studying, like find out what their part is to find out like little tricks and they're like that. But definitely knowing some knowledge about pedaling is definitely going to help out the education side of things if you can find a little bit of some tricks in there,
And I wouldn't be afraid either. Jim showed us very early in this, 3 different versions of a book for 3 different players. But I would maybe even challenge a beginning timpanist with 3 different versions of their warm-ups and stuff throughout the season. So that maybe, band camp looks like that first version, and then the first half of the season looks like the middle version, and the second or the last half of the season looks like the third version, so that there's something that's growing. Because we tend to always set it and forget it with this kind of stuff, and we don't really think about progression. So I think really figuring out, what does the student have today? Where do we want them to go? How can I break that up into 3 different parts and let them go at it? And not yell at them all the time when they're out of tune, because they're back there trying. You know what I mean? They're putting in the work.
Yeah, and as Thomas commented, there are different versions for different tempos for the exercises. And I always thought, when you guys were talking about scales, I always thought one of the tough things for a timpanist as well is basic short exercises, like think green scales, where you have to cycle through 12 keys and learn how to, okay, now I have these 3 pitches that I have to set in the next key. And now I have to go to this key, I have to invert it and go this way. And I think that can be very useful as well. Those short scale exercises where you have a pattern that has to move through 12 keys. It could be 2 notes, it could be 3 notes, but you have to figure out how to place it on the drums and make those adjustments during the tap off for the next key.
Yeah, that's huge, especially if your tap off is just like, and on C, 1, 2, here we go, and D, and like your timpanist has no idea what they're doing because now they have to change all 4 drums, and that's a huge thing. I really like having, if the front ensemble is doing all scales, I'll have my basic, which is just like the 1/5s. And then maybe I'll have like the right hand that they're playing on the marimba, and then you end up doing like some sweeps on the timpani if it gets too fast, and just having those different variations. If you have a really advanced timpanist, they can even switch up styles like a rhythm section can do. I still find that really hard because you gotta like figure out what note goes in if you're moving that rhythm, and that's a whole nother conversation. But just try and consider that your timpanist needs that time, but they should also have those different variations.
I know we've said a lot of like advanced kind of stuff. We talked about pedaling and all this stuff that like a lot of students won't be able to do, which is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I think maybe a controversial thing, maybe it isn't. Most players, at least that I've worked with, seem to be in that very beginner to like slightly intermediate kind of place. if we're talking about high school here,
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes that we actually overemphasize the ear training part too early. And what I mean by that is like it's a skill they don't have, but we're putting all the weight on it. And it's like we're trying not to make it scary. We're trying to give them the time to figure it out because we know you can't figure it out in 2 seconds. Like, I almost love anchoring myself. I mean, still to this day as a professional player, I live on my gauges. We can argue all day long if like the traditional values of like being able to just do it with your ears, and like I can do that stuff, but it doesn't matter. Like they're a tool. They get me in the ballpark, and of course I'll check when I have time and that kind of thing, But I think for beginning players, whether it's middle and high school or even undergrads in some standpoint, like what's wrong with actually seeing the pitch? And for depending on the student, of course, you know what I mean? But like for students that have not done this before, they're afraid of the instrument. They haven't played timpani. There's this whatever. They feel like they're tone deaf. What's wrong with letting them see the pitch on the gauge and just experiencing that resonance of the D actually being in tune with the tubas? And over time, understanding, oh, that's what that is. You know what I mean? Rather than like, no, do this now at the beginning. You've never done this before, but you need to do it now. Like, I think it's just far too much of that. And in my opinion, I think just looking at that pitch in a lot of ways is the best thing for beginners.
And I'm absolutely like a firm believer in like, if you work with the gauges, like do it. And like everybody should, honestly, because if you do that accumulatively, like you will have muscle memory, at some point in the season. It might be later or sooner for some people, but at some point your show is just going to become muscle memory and your feet will know exactly where to go without you even thinking about it. So go with the gauges at, even until the final day, like finals day,
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it.
And I didn't even mean for like pedaling stuff. I just mean like, even if it's this 1-5 and you got like 3-4 pitches the whole performance, like what's wrong with looking at that next thing for beginners? You know what I mean? Like, I know we're being super lofty right now. And we're talking about people that play in the cadets and Bluecoats and Crown. Like I'm talking about like people that haven't done this before, So like, I don't know. Jim, do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, it's like I said at the beginning, it's like you're saying, rather than, you need to have a developed ear to do this. It's like, no, we're going to do this to develop your ear. So yeah, I don't care how you got to that playing in tune, but now you're hearing it in tune. So, now you're hearing, even if you're using the gauges, you're hearing it what it sounds like when that pitch resonates with this instrument. And then you can also hear this gauge is slightly out here, how it's not resonating with that anymore. So yeah, I think that's however we can get people into the driver's seat and comfortable and take some of the fear out, that's all good. That's all great.
Yeah. I think that's one thing about timpani culture that just bothers me in general, is there's too much like supposed to culture. You're supposed to do this. You're supposed to do that. And I'm like, oh, whatever works. It's my 2 cents.
I actually like using the gauges as a teaching tool the whole time, because I think, like, we talked a lot about how the weather changes the where the range is. So I essentially, like, if this is my gauge, I know the weather has taken it here. So I like to actually look at, here's where the A should be, but it's actually right here. Students need to see that, because that's the best visual aid to show like how weather affects the pitch. And I mean, we're at the top level and at the bottom. You still look at your gauges if you have them, of course. I know some timpani don't. But you still look at your gauges and you're welcome to use it. I really only care about the ear because the gauges are, it's like what you're aiming for, but you need to understand, like, if you just switched environments, the student needs to know, like, hey, it's not always going to be on the line of the A. You might have to be right above it. So I love that as a teaching tool. And I think it's a great way to visualize pitch.
It's funny, we talked about the Alamo Dome too, tuning higher, because whenever you go in, it starts to sag. Like, as the performance is going on, and to your point, you start seeing that, oh man, I'm really starting to sag here. You have to make all of them sag the same amount on that same drum, if that makes sense.
It's such a crazy instrument, man. It's
Exactly. The Alamo Dome brought me down almost an entire half step, actually. So I was almost like, if I were trying to play a B flat, I'd actually have to aim for the B on my gauges.
Yeah, and then that would like eliminate some notes because you couldn't reach them, like your top notes.
Mm-hmm. Somebody, Perry was asking in the comments, like, about gauges, since we're on that topic. Like, what do you do if you don't have gauges? And we kind of said it earlier. One fix is to go maybe get some white string or something that's kind of heavy duty, that's not going to pull. Because if you get something that has some elasticity to it, it can kind of vary depending on, where it is. So you need something that's kind of firm. Or like tying that down to the pedal. Fishing line, Lucas said. Yep. But and then you can put like a little flag or a piece of tape or something on there as your indicator, so that as it's sliding on the rim. And of course you get a piece of tape that has the pitches notated on there. And then as the fishing line is sliding, it's starting to indicate the different pitches. And you have to have something with a little bit of weight on the other end to counterbalance that and counterweight it so it moves. They can't be too heavy because then it starts pulling it funny. Yeah, it's not preferred, of course.
Honestly, my best recommendation is to first make sure with a tuning app, or if you have perfect pitch, make sure that the set of timpani are in the right range. As long as it's in the right range, then the timpanist can actually use picturing like a clock, or they're probably in a math class. So use the angles for geometry and just have them know, like, hey, 45 degrees on this drum is going to be a G for you. And then as you go down towards 0, that gets higher. So use, that's cross curriculum stuff right there. And it's a great way for them to visualize that with their feet, but they need to be in range for you to do that.
In range. Don't touch the silver knob first, please. On your Ludwigs.
And the people that do that drive me so nuts.
All right. Well, there are no other questions here. So right now I'm going to drop my email and my Instagram handle in the chat. And if any other clinicians want to do something similar, you're welcome to do so. If any of you have more questions that you want answered, if you're starting marching band season and you need someone to ask about timpani, please come to me. I love that stuff. And I'm happy to even hop on a call with you if needed, or do like a Zoom session with your timpanist. I love education. So I'm happy to do so. And I really just want to thank you all for coming, and thank the panelists. And I hope you guys can turn on your mic and clap, or put the emoji of clapping, because these guys have been really great.